What is your view? Do you think they will be able to really harness AI and AI can help enhance the consumer experience? Indian consumer experience.
Right? I think India is up to 750 to 800 million internet users. I think that opens up a whole opportunity. Open network for digital commerce, I think, is a hugely positive step.
What are your views of Tesla's entry in India?
I think India is right for the EV disruption. I think it requires the one big step jump. And like all things Musk, I think one expects a higher level of disruption and innovation from him. The other, I would think, is truly being a category creator in a sense is Uber. Of course, there is an Indian avatar, Indian format in Ola, but Uber was really the one that created the whole ride sharing and really kind of spread the tentacles around the country. Though as a lot of Western investors still recognize that the Uber driver in India is like a professional cab driver. He's not someone, as you would see in many parts of the world, who's like a part-timer who's making money on the side. But I think Uber is another great example of a company that's done well. And I would say there are a couple of social media companies that have also, in a sense, cracked the code. They've understood the nuance of Indian consumers. Maybe when TikTok first came in, I mean, they democratized short format video production, right? In a very easy to understand manner. Earlier, video production was like a formal function. Now it's like every 10-year-old can pretty much create his own little video. So I would say there are companies, but I clearly think IKEA and Uber stand out dramatically.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. I have met Suzanne in Denmark, and she's a brilliant woman. I believe she's now the MD of IKEA India. It will be wonderful for her to listen to this. But you're right. IKEA did something fantastic. The location of the stores, the hype, the marketing, the campaign, and speaking of the experience of shopping, besides the nuts and bolts can be fixed because we are not used to of doing it ourselves. So the collaboration with local partner was a brilliant move.
Absolutely.
Right. Speaking of a customer experience and enhancing customer experience, because it helps in the stickiness for the customers. AI has been the new hero on the block, which has been used by several companies to enhance consumer experience. The popular ones that comes to my mind, recent ones, are Netflix and Make My Trip. What is your view? Do you think they will be able to really harness AI and AI can help enhance the consumer experience, Indian consumer experience?
Absolutely. I think, like I said, just given the spread of the internet, right? I think India is up to 750 to 800 million internet users. I think that opens up a whole opportunity. And I think what AI can do best is one is harness the deep data available to provide proper consumer cues. All right. Now, I just want to bring 2 points in. I think one is the fact that AI and Gen AI specifically can actually customize offerings and communication to an individual level. Right? We've seen great examples recently of brands that I've used where you can get a video from a celebrity who, when the moment you open the video, he addresses you by name, right? So he'll say, "Hi, Jyoti," and he'll have a message for you. I think that kind of strikes, that's novel and new. That's great. But two is also the ability of AI's ability to harness deep data to make sure that they're targeting the right kind of consumer at an appropriate time, at an appropriate place. I think that's a big plus. And that brings me to what I think is one big advantage that India has, possibly even ahead of some of the most advanced economies, is that India has truly developed world-class digital public infrastructure, right? While our physical infrastructure still lags behind vast parts of the world and is still some way from being world-class, I think our digital public infrastructure has been truly the highlight of India over the last decade. And I'll give two examples. One is, as everyone talks about, the India stack. So what is the India stack? I think the India stack is basically three parts. The fact that our 1.4 billion Indians, about 1.3 today have a biometric enabled citizen card.
That's
right?
massive.
And this is completely safe, right? So you don't need to give your card to a person as long as he can scan your biometrics. It can identify that you are you. No one's impersonating you. On top of that is the second layer, the fact that there are about 750 million Indians who own a smartphone, right? So all of this can be correlated. So you don't have to physically carry your card, but just your smartphone can authenticate that you are you via the back end, which is totally securely protected, which is the Aadhaar card or the
Yes.
identity card. And I think the third level, which is a recent development, which the government of the day has much to take credit for, is the fact that today a lot of unbanked Indians have a bank account. So you're talking of close to about 700 million Indians having a bank account. And the actual number is closer to about 600, but growing rapidly. So a lot of funds can be transferred to the end recipient without any leakages. Right? So historically, India had the ability to give the poorest to the poor some guaranteed wage basis work done. But a lot of that money was siphoned off by intermediaries. So whether the end recipient actually got the money was questionable. Now, it gets directly transferred to their bank accounts. Right? It's what's called the Prime Minister's Jan Dhan Yojana, which is everyone have a bank account. So I think a combination of all these three things have really made India digitally very secure. And we've seen 2 or 3 great examples, I think, rolling out the vaccinations, right? Administering 2 crore, or that's 2 billion. 2 crore is not exactly 2 billion. That's 200,000. So that's, so 2 crore vaccines to, two doses of vaccines, all in the span of 14 months, I think was remarkable. I think we're seeing other things in ONDC, something called the Digi Yatra, where you have actually a face recognition enabled tool that lets you enter an airport without any manual, someone checking whether it's you actually entering the airport. So I think some of these have been great. And I think businesses that have taken into account these factors, can actually leapfrog quite dramatically.
I think you touched upon a very important point which cannot be missed by any global businesses and investors or allocators or fence sitters is and I would like to say, and I would like to know your opinion, is while the Industrial Revolution was led by Englishmen, it seems that the digital revolution will be led by India. And you mentioned about the robust digital stack that has been built up in India, starting with UPI. And there is a lot of data that has been generated. You spoke about Aadhaar and stuff. Speaking of data, which I think the global players must understand that what's underway in India, because with 1.4 billion population and 750 million smartphone user and internet penetration, there's a lot of data generation that is happening of Indian consumers. What is your views and some insights that you would like to give on the data protection bill and various steps that the government of India is taking to localize the data?
Prior to the data protection bill that the Indian Parliament passed less than a month ago, many Indian firms and many global firms followed the GDPR, the European GDPR. So that was pretty much table stakes. The Indian data protection bill has gone one step further and has insisted on some degree of data localization. So some of the large global companies, they need to store their data locally. The other thing is given Indian regulators a power to actually go into individual accounts of people who are spreading hate or whatever, and therefore suspend accounts. But that's more in the regulator framework. I think what companies need to recognize is that Indians are reasonably comfortable trading off some degree of personal data as long as they get something in return. So it is, in a sense, the fact that people don't want to pay for digital subscriptions. But if they're trading their attention against a free subscription, so be it. It's very often you'll find Indian consumers giving their numbers at restaurants if they are offered a special deal or a discount. So I think the ability to trade off some degree of privacy against return, I think in that sense is reasonably unique. But as a company, I think it's good to follow the data protection bill standards. I think there are certain very, very basic norms. There are some data localization norms, but all of them are clear, transparent, and in a sense meant to protect the integrity of the country.
Speaking of India's digital stack, Lloyd, there has been one very recent and remarkable step by the policymakers, Government of India, which is Open Network Digital Commerce, ONDC. What do you think is the objective of government here? And why is it important that the global businesses in the B2C or a D2C space should make a note of it?
Open network for digital commerce, I think, is a hugely positive step. And here's why. I think what India did on the payments ecosystem it created the National Payments Council of India, the NPCI, which in turn put what is called the United Payment Interface. What does the United Payment Interface, the UPI, do? It lets any consumer choose the payment gateway. It all goes through the United Payment Interface, which is linked back to his bank account. So it makes the whole thing seamless. It's safe. You can pay out of your mobile phone, which is why India today you have the ability where you can buy an item worth 20 cents, a 5 rupee item from a store using your mobile phone, because it's safely and securely linked to your bank account. I think India is trying to replicate this in e-commerce, which historically and world over has been dominated by one or two key players. I think what they've realized over time is that one or two key players who dominate that space, they will have a preferred list of vendors who will keep showing up as the preferred choices. What the open network or the ONDC does is it treats everyone equally. So if you're in a particular geography location, you want to buy a particular product, let's say you want to buy a book. So it'll give you the option of all the bookstores. You can choose your bookstore. It'll give you all the price transparency. You can choose that. It'll give you how you want it delivered to you, which are the various logistics options, right? There might be some preferred logistic options. It can give you whichever way you want to pay, which is your preferred payment gateway. So I think it makes the whole process transparent and democratic. And therefore, for the consumer, there is better price discovery. There's better source discovery, which is the vendor you want to buy from. And there's better, supply chain, so you'll know which is the best effective supply chain. And over time, you'll reach, your optimum level. So in that sense, it is a hugely positive step. Though the usage interface will take a while, right? As we all know, we're all very familiar with our set-to-use e-commerce platform. So we know it's one click away, this is how I do it. This will take a time to build up. But I think over time, it makes the process democratic, it makes it more transparent. It gives the consumer, hopefully, much better choices and better pricing. It also prevents, e-commerce platforms for holding vendors at ransom. Right? So if you're a supplier, I think this opens it up. So I think directionally it's right. It might take a while to gain currency for the simple reason that usage interface takes a while. Two is, over time, I think some of the larger platforms will also look at how they can migrate. But certainly I know a lot of vendors, a lot of suppliers who are hugely excited. We're already hearing about some news of food platforms feeling a little disrupted because they sit on pretty good margins, and over time they have preferred restaurants that you can order from. I think this throws it open altogether. So I think it's beneficial all told. And I think if India is able to make a success of ONDC, it's something that can go to vast swathes of the developing world. And I think it's something that is a step in the right direction.
Right. Speaking of from India to the world, there has been a recent announcement with regards to electronic good manufacturer, laptops and stuff. And Government of India and policy makers have, while the stand got deferred, but how do you see a policy initiative that encourages local manufacturers and it's taking a little detour or recheck on how India supplies to the world? This step has received mixed feedback, but I would like to understand from you, Lloyd, that how do you see this step of supporting local manufacturers in this format?
The pandemic in 2020 disrupted the global supply chain, right? Because clearly China was the first country where it kind of it took off, and we saw the disruptions in supply chain which haven't been fully resolved. That made a lot of global corporations relook at supply chain being purely a function of price, saying why should I source it from the cheapest place, which in most cases happened to be China, to the whole world. I think today many companies want to de-risk their supply chain by looking at a China plus one or looking at global manufacture. The second point is in the context of ESG, I think companies are also recognizing it makes sense to source from companies which are large markets within themselves.
Right.
So effectively you're giving back to the community. So I think directionally the push is right. Of course, the big concern is that this should not go back to that license Raj, the period when the government is handing out licenses. Right. So I think, but what I think the government is attempting to do is push for increasingly local manufacture.
Right.
So the large global companies can relocate or bring some of the manufacturing into India and obviously therefore derive the benefits of manufacturing here. It might start off being largely more assembly, but over time, indigenization will increase.
Right.
So I think it's a step in the right direction. I think every country needs to do what is good for its own, and creating employment specifically in manufacturing has been a big objective of India for decades now. So I think the step is it's a step in the right direction, Though I think how the modalities pan out will have to be seen. It cannot be, kind of blotting out or stopping international companies from bringing goods in. I think that will be an unfair thing. You don't want to make it unfair to consumers or deprive consumers of wide choice. At the same time, you certainly want to boost manufacturing. So in that sense, I think it's directionally right.
Wow. Well, good to know. And anyways, we have heard that Apple has moved its manufacturing here, and so are many other multinationals that are looking India positively.
I think a large chunk of smartphones now have begun to be manufactured. Manufacturing, of course, is a broad term, right, from basic assembly to advanced assembly. But the reality is, I think on smartphones it has happened. Though in other categories, there's still a long way to go.
Right. Absolutely. You mentioned that the COVID did different things to different economies, and of course one common denominator that we all went to a reset mode, and when we came out of it we had new ideas, new approach towards a lot of things. In context of India, would you like to share with us the top disruptions that took place which are unique to us and should be noted by the global businesses as we speak today?
Sure. If I look back at the last decade, or specifically the last 8 years, I think there are kind of 6 disruptions that everyone should watch out for, whether it's an investor or a new business coming to the country. I think the first is that the pandemic changed people's orientation. Right? Suddenly people realize that how little it takes to get by. So I think that has been obviously a disruption, and that's truly global. But if I would look at the Indian context, I would see there are 5 clear areas that have been disrupted. I think one has been the spread of the internet. Starting 2016, there's a company that came in that made India today the lowest priced data in the world. Right? So today, data consumption in India is really cheap. And therefore, most Indians, 750 million Indians, are on the internet, which is the largest single swathe of humanity after China.
Yeah.
And I dare say the way it's increasing, in a couple of years' time, India would reach the 1 billion mark. Right? So I think that is big. So one is the spread of the internet on the back of low price for data and very reasonably priced, almost cheap smartphones have helped dramatically. So I think that's the one big part. The second is, I think, India's digital public infrastructure. The fact that India linked the biometrics with a payment ecosystem, people's bank accounts, and overlaid on that the fact that there are a lot of apps that can sit pretty on this data stack, right? So biometrics, identifying people. 2 is the payment infrastructure, which is called the Jan Dhan or the bank account scheme. And on that, a whole range of apps that sit pretty, that are safe, secure, and confidential. Everything from the United Payments interface, the NPCI app, or the Covaxin app, or what is called Digi Yatra, where you can enter an airport with facial recognition. I think that has been phenomenal, right? And one has really seen the value of digital public infrastructure, the second part. I think parallel to this have been 2 other disruptions. The first is the easier availability of venture capital and early stage venture capital. Till about a decade back, most of the smartest students in the best business schools looked for a corporate job, looked for a well-paying job. Today, 1 in 2 kids looks at turning entrepreneur. That's because it is fairly easy to put together get your idea together, get a couple of seed investors or angel networks to back you, move on with it. Maybe a year or 2 later, you're ready for the next round of funding, and then you gradually move up Series A, Series B, and so on and so forth. So I think encouraging entrepreneurship through venture capital has been a significant jump. Today, a lot more Indians are turning entrepreneur, and a lot of the learnings in the Indian market can be taken elsewhere in the world. Right? So I think this culture of entrepreneurship has been phenomenal. The fourth, closely allied to this, is business model innovation. While a lot of Indian startups have adapted global models, so let's say Swiggy and Zomato kind of recreated the DoorDash US model, or Ola recreated the Uber model. But I think with significant local variations, the fact that there are startups that have innovated, and India is having its own peculiar challenges that makes things different, I think have been significant. The fact that business model innovation has helped, and business model innovation keeping into the fact that local nuances of the Indian market have been tremendous. I think that's the fourth. The last, which is part global but also significantly Indian, is the changing Indian consumer. The fact that this is the youngest demographic in the world, right? The average age of the Indian consumer is 27 years. Says a lot in itself, but also the fact that the younger consumer is beginning to look at life and his product and consumer choices differently, right? So there's a greater concern for the environment because young Indians are actually seeing polluted environments, which are not acceptable. The fact that people are doing a lot more things online, which they were doing physically earlier, right? Ordering food, ride hailing, consuming entertainment. People on average spend 5 hours a day consuming entertainment out of their smartphone. I think huge numbers. So I think the changing consumer. So I think a summation of these 5 factors, changing innovation models, or rather new innovation models, the changing consumer, the growth of the internet, the secure Indian digital stack, have together kind of changed the country quite dramatically in the last 5 to 7 years, more than it has possibly for 5 decades before that. And I think that has unleashed a whole power of innovation. That has unleashed a whole range of new products. And therefore, I would think that India is very well poised. For a global investor, I think this is the time. India is changing for the better. The economy is growing. It's the fastest paced economy in the world, especially the large economy. And third is, I think India is putting a lot of building blocks for the future. Digital public infrastructure, some degree of improvement in physical infrastructure. I think a younger audience that is more in tune with global needs, at the same time recognizing their cultural differences. I think all this is contributing to make India a very, very powerful and a great investment destination.
That's absolutely bang on, Lloyd. Speaking of India putting right building blocks, attracting global businesses, one of the new entrants and everyone is looking forward to is Tesla. And what are your views of Tesla's entry in India? And of course, what is the message and advice to Elon Musk?
It's great that Tesla is coming to India. I think India would certainly welcome it. I think India is right for the EV disruption. I think a lot of Indian manufacturers have already created EV cars. But I think it requires the one big step jump. So, I think it'll be positive. And like all things Musk, I think one expects a higher level of disruption and innovation from him. So I think very little to offer advice to the world's richest man or the world's most innovative man. But I would say that, again, recognize the nuances of the market. The global model cut paste into India doesn't always work. As a whole generation of international entrepreneurs have figured the hard way. I think the idea is, how do you recognize the nuances of the market? How do you tailor make your offering, both product and service offerings, to the local consumer? I think will play a big role. But it'll be wonderful. We'd be delighted to welcome Tesla and Elon Musk into India.
Lovely. You mentioned about EV. Do you think Elon Musk will be entering the EV space, or do you think that he should also consider the telecom, or will he enter into both?
I think anybody's guess, like they say, no one can predict what Elon Musk is up to next, not even Elon Musk. Having said which, I think he's got great offerings on both. And the third one, which you haven't mentioned, is really his underground tunneling. But I think in technology, I think there is the option for disruption. I think clearly with what he's doing with SpaceLink, I think that is clearly an option. But I think in EVs, certainly. And when I'm saying EVs, it's not just the classical Tesla four-wheeler private car model. If India EV has to succeed, it has to transcend the four-wheeler private car model. It has to become, what every possibly Uber and Ola driver wants to use. It has to be what every three-wheeler guy wants to use. It has to be what every two-wheeler wants to use. So I think the EV disruption is more than just a factor of four-wheeler private car manufacturers. It's public transport, it's cargo transport, it's three-wheelers, it's two-wheelers, it's cabs. I think that's when true disruption will happen, and India needs it, right? Given our commitments to the fact that we want to restrict, climate change, or we want to really help contain our pollution levels. I think it's a very, very positive step.
Wow, that will be good. Elon Musk, you must be pleased noting this. We are looking forward to welcome you here in India, but there are a few things that you must nail here, and you heard it from Lloyd. Indian consumer today is far aware, is young, it's pretty sorted. It has its own checklist of choices they make and how they make it. Indian consumer is traditional, sensitive, modern, and go-getter as well. It's difficult to get to the exact liking of an Indian consumer today. It's it's layers and layers, as Lloyd said, that there are lot of layers one has to cut through to really nail the enigma of Indian consumer experience. But not one, but several elements, if put together, can help you win this game in India. And if you're feeling lost, you can always tune into this episode, because this has all the insight. And Lloyd, you have shared it so much well. I don't want this podcast to get over, because there's so much more to you that we can get benefited of. We haven't covered angel journey of yours. We haven't covered a lot of others. But as we say, there's always a next time. I can't thank you enough for joining me on this episode of Enigma India. This is purely created for world to understand India opportunity better. Thank you so much, Lloyd.
Thank you, Jyoti. Wonderful chatting. I think great exchange, and I really enjoyed this episode of Enigma India. Thanks
Lovely.
so much for having me.
On that note, fantastic. Thank you once again.